culture, social norms, attitudes in society. And I think economists for a long time have avoided this topic because it makes us a little bit uncomfortable. We're quite comfortable talking about interest rates, GDP, unemployment rates. We have nice models for that. But we haven't had traditionally models for thinking through culture. And in addition, these models didn't allow us to think about how culture should interact with economic policy making. But in recent years, myself and economist colleagues around the world have really started to focus, thinking really hard about the role of culture in the economy. And how we should think about making economic policy that benefits economic growth and other desirable outcomes in society through the lens of culture. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. And I'm going to provide you with some simple theoretical framework for thinking through some of these issues. But this theoretical framework would also guide us in terms of data and what we should be looking for. What data do we need to maybe test different hypotheses and confirm or reject certain hypotheses in ways that ultimately will guide policy. So today I want to give you some simple examples, both on the theory side, but on the empirical sides. Things that I think will have implications for Ghana, and I will include some data from Ghana that I've collected myself. So my title is, as you can see, Social Norms, Culture, and Gender Equality. What role for economic policymaking? And I'm going to focus today on gender equality. I think it's an important topic. But the general framework that I will be talking about today can be applied to many, many different types of situations, including something relatively micro, such as why are women not breastfeeding for very long, to why are some people not paying their taxes, to why is there so much corruption in certain levels of society. Okay? To the extent that those questions partly have an answer in culture and attitudes, the framework today could be applicable potentially to those issues as well. But to fix ideas, I want to talk about gender equality because it is, after all, one of the key sustainable development goals. And I think gender equality is interesting for two reasons. A lot of us believe that maybe it's desirable in of itself. But as an economist, I think there's a second dimension that we ask ourselves, which is, what are the consequences of gender equality in terms of economic outcomes? And on some level, since 50% of the population consists of women, if this big share of the population, if their skills and their energy and their capabilities are underutilized in society, it's almost follows automatically that the country will not grow and be as rich as it can be. And also that the talents in society are not allocated in the right way. So that's the second reason why it's interesting for me. So if we just take a quick look at Ghana today, and of course there are many dimensions of gender equality, but for example, we can look at political representation in national parliament or local governments, and women are heavily underrepresented. If we look on the private side of things, in firms, or more broadly, organizations, and we look at the share of women in managerial positions, especially in the senior level, they're only a small minority. So the yellow here tells us that about 1/4 of senior middle management positions are occupied by women. So as an economist, again, there's sort of two ways of thinking about this. In terms of gender equality, it's by definition bad. But more complicated question is, what happens if we increase this share? Is this good for the economy or not good for the economy? And this is a much harder question. Okay. But I want to bring back what I mentioned about culture and social attitudes. And as my previous colleague mentioned, without data, I think it's very hard to get any traction on these issues. The data, guided by theory, will tell us how the world works. So now I'm actually going to collect some data in this room. I'm going to ask all the adults in the room to pull up your cell phones. And I'm going to run a little survey with you. This is completely anonymous, by the way, so you don't have to be worried about being monitored. I really want you to look inside of yourself and search for how you truly feel on this issue. Don't forget about what you think is politically correct or what you think maybe your colleagues would want you to say. Just try to be honest with yourself and ask yourself the question, in your private opinion, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The government and companies should give priority to women when hiring for leadership positions. Okay, it's a simple question, simple two options. You either agree or disagree. And so here comes the survey. Pull up your cell phones, go to menti.com, so open the web browser, and enter the code, and tell me your position on this matter. Switch to Menti, please. So we have 3 answers so far. In case it's unclear, you go to www.menti.com. You see at the very top, and there's a code you have to enter, 9023-1325, and then you can provide your answer to this question. Is it working? It's not working. What if you click refresh? Voting is closed. No, I see people, there's more votes coming in, 36, 37. Okay, we're going to close the poll in 10 seconds. So please provide your answer if you haven't already. And after I close the poll, we're not going to look at the results for now, but I'm going to ask you a second question. So be ready. So please close the poll now. Don't show the results. Now go to the next question. And if you can please show the Menti slide on the screen. On Menti. So now I want you to think, not looking inside of you, but look around you. Look at the people in this room. And ask yourself the question, so can we please go to Menti? Next. Try to guess, what percent of people in this room that just answered this question, what percent do you think answered agree? Do you think it's 0%? Do you think it's 100%? Do you think it's somewhere in between, 5%, 90%? Just provide us with your best prediction. And please hide the results. Okay, we're good. We're to 78 people, 80 people. Very good. So we'll close the poll in 5 seconds. So please close the poll now and then go back to PowerPoint. All right, so why am I asking you this? I really asked you 2 types of questions. First, your private opinion. This is what we economists call your first order beliefs, your private opinion on the matter. The second question, I asked you to look around you in the social context that you're in right now, where you have to think about, what do my peers, what do my colleagues, What do other people in this segment of society think on the same issue? This is what we call second-order beliefs. These two objects will determine, in theory, a lot of how culture influences behavior. But for that, we need a simple framework for thinking this through. And I won't show you any math today, but I'm going to show you a graphical illustration of the underlying theory. So think of a decision maker here in the center. We can think of this as a male running, for example, at an organization and considering whether to put a female very high up in a managerial position. Now, this decision maker can either be in favor of this or not from a personal point of view. And here it's signified by color red. So this particular person actually privately, secretly, would like this to happen. However, he's not operating in a vacuum. He's operating in a social context. And when he looks at his peers around him, there's only a few other people that are in favor of this position. Right? So he might take this into account when deciding whether to actually go ahead with this policy or go ahead with this hiring. Now think of the very same person operating in a different social context where it's more socially acceptable to take this particular action. Right? So think of the people around him changing. So there's a couple of more people that are also in favor, maybe many more people, maybe not even a small minority, but a vast majority. Now this decision for this person who had the same economic fundamentals in front of him, same values himself, is in a different social context that may make it much easier for him to take this action, right? Because the social acceptability, maybe even the pressure to hire a female in a leading position is much higher, right? So this is what I mean by culture and social norms, how it can influence economic decision making. Okay. Now, this already, I think, gets us quite far for thinking through in a structured way how culture and social norms and attitudes affects decision making and economic behavior. But there's one more wrinkle to the story that is, I think, particularly interesting, which is, if you want to think of a country like Ghana today, you might think, all right, are we in this case A, right, where a small minority is in support, or are we in where actually a big majority is in support? And that's all fine and good, and we can try to get data to figure this out. But there's a second wrinkle, which I get to next, which is influenced by social psychology, an old idea that hasn't really been tested much in the kind of environments that I'm talking about. But that is, we have a perception of the culture we live in. You all have a perception of the culture you live in. I just asked you about your perception of the values in this room. This is your perception. Now, we can assume that you perfectly understand your culture. We're all here perfectly knowledgeable about the culture. There's no mystery. However, there's a possibility that a lot of us don't still understand our own culture. And I certainly am not from Ghana, so I probably don't understand it well. But there's a chance that a lot of you in the room actually don't understand it well as well. What data are you basing your thinking on, right? So maybe the reality looks like to the right, but you perceive it as to the left. And this is a concept in social psychology called pluralistic ignorance. People think they're in a minority in a position, they keep quiet, they don't speak up, they don't say how they truly feel, but many people are in this same position, they're actually in a majority. This is called pluralistic ignorance. And if that is the case, there's now scope for policy under certain circumstances to just show the truth. And this just very low cost intervention could radically change behavior. Let me give you one example of that from my own work, from Saudi Arabia. This is work I did when I was at Harvard with my research group. We collaborated with Ministry of Labor of Saudi Arabia. They really wanted women to get into the labor market. They saw this problem that very few women, only 4%, work outside of the home. And it's not a matter of lack of skills or education. Actually, the college education rates for women is higher than for men And by all accounts, women actually want to make use of this human capital in the labor market. But the government said, look, we have a very conservative culture in this country that prohibits this from happening. So how should we design policies to get women into this labor market? And we had a full weekend discussion with a group of economists on one side of the table and a delegation from the Ministry of Labor trying to brainstorm what can be done. And the types of suggestions that came up, I would say, were very traditional. Well, what about childcare? If women are going to work, who's going to take care of the children? There's no childcare in the country. So we need to buy or invest in facilities. That was one suggestion, for example. Well, women can't drive, so how are they going to get to work, right? And they're not allowed to go on a bus on their own. So maybe we can set up some sophisticated Uber system just for women or something like that. Okay, these are suggestions that may well increase women into the labor market, but are going to be extremely costly to implement and not done in a day. So me and my colleagues had a crazy idea. We thought maybe this delegation from Saudi Arabia is wrong. Maybe they think men are conservative. And by the way, they focus a lot on men because men have a lot of decision-making power in households in Ghana, like in many other countries. So married men, they claim, will never let their wives go to work because that will reflect badly upon them. They're the breadwinners. They're supposed to provide. If they send a woman out to work, that reflects poorly on them. So we thought, maybe this is wrong. Maybe men in Saudi Arabia are actually not very conservative, but it's a culture where people don't talk about these things. So they're all quietly walking around with progressive ideals, and they're totally fine with their wife working outside of the home and increasing the household income. But they're afraid to take that action because they think that they will be judged by their relatives, by their neighbors, by their peers.